There's a lot that goes into creating a champion for League of Legends. You need to come up with a theme for the character, for starters, then settle on a design. You need to figure out the champion's gameplay and kit, settle on a region of origin, a backstory, a direction for the character's story to go, and so much more. Now, obviously, I'm not a Rioter, so I have no official experience making actual champions for League. The process is likely even more complicated than I give it credit for, but I do at least understand that it's not by any means a simple process. Most champions likely undergo several different iterations before reaching their final stage. That said, there are some champions who seem to have multiple ideas blended together. For example, Akshan wants to be a rogue Sentinel of Light who abandoned his order to pursue his own vendetta, while also acting as a sort of Shuriman Robin Hood. Jin was conceptualized as this high-tech assassin before getting a bit of murder artist thrown into the mix. The topic of today's video has not just two, but three different core concepts baked into his character: a zealous assassin, a master of many weapons, and a protector to his sibling. These three ideas merged into a single champion that we now know as Aphelios. Aphelios was released on December 11th, 2019. Technically speaking, though, Aphelios is not just one champion, but two. Like Nunu and Willump or the Kindred, Aphelios is a package deal with his sister, Elune. Unlike the other two examples, though, Elune's role in the dynamic is less immediately apparent. Rather than being physically present alongside her brother, Elune lurks in the spirit realm, never really showing herself outside of recall animations and speaking in Aphelios' place, but only if you are playing Aphelios because she speaks in his head. But perhaps I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's back up a bit. Aphelios and Elune were both basically born as these special destiny children among the Lunari. Their births were heralded by some undisclosed celestial event, which meant that Aphelios and Elune were never going to have a normal childhood. Both kids grew up steeped in the culture of their faith, with Aphelios training to become a Lunari assassin and Elune training to become a seer. Both of them came to understand very well the oppression their people suffered under the Solari, who viewed the moon-worshipping Lunari as heretics. As they matured, the siblings were forced to spend more and more time away from each other to fulfill their respective duties. This was especially hard on Aphelios, who was apparently never able to open up to anyone but his sister, so he took a pilgrimage that led him to a pool of these poisonous flowers. Consuming the extract of these flowers filled Aphelios' body with a literally mind-numbing pain, which in turn apparently allowed him to harness more of the moon's power. However that works. Anyways, a Lunari temple called the Maris Omegnum suddenly appears from the spirit realm, because the Lunari apparently have a temple there somehow, and moon worshippers from all over Targon flock to it. The Solari catch wind of this and send their own troops to slaughter the Lunari en masse, and Aphelios was forced to help fight them off while Elune entered the temple by herself. Inside, Elune was able to aid her brother by teleporting special moonstone weapons into his hands, thus allowing Aphelios to turn the tide of battle. The temple and Elune both vanished back into the spirit realm, but the bond between her and Aphelios can be maintained so long as he keeps numbing himself with Noctum poison. Now the two work in conjunction with each other to fight back against Solari oppression. Together, Aphelios and Elune act as the voice of the moon, defending the Lunari and tipping the celestial scales in their favor. So, question. What the hell happened to Diana? Like, is that not supposed to be the role of the aspect of the moon? Guiding the Lunari back to prominence, pushing back against Solari oppression, enacting the will of the lunar goddess? It feels weird to me that Riot decided to make Aphelios and Elune the moon's chosen ones when it already had a chosen one. I'll give credit where it's due. Aphelios and Elune do seem to tackle a slightly different role in how they function. While Diana has a more direct connection with her goddess and is more frequently enacting her will in a variety of different ways, The siblings fill a much more specific purpose. In fact, Aphelios and Elune seem to be even more zealous than their aspect. There's a common theme with the siblings about suffering for their faith. Aphelios has to maintain a spiritual connection to his sister by consuming poison on the regular, while Elune has to endure self-isolation inside a sacred temple. These are actual practices that real religious groups have implemented in real life, among other rituals such as fasting, self-flagellation, and so on. It is interesting, if a bit bold, for Riot to try paralleling these sorts of practices in their own fictional cults. It's only a shame that Aphelios himself isn't quite so interesting of a character. Unlike other 2-in-1 champions, Aphelios is just Aphelios. Despite how important his connection to Elune is supposed to be, she's really a non-entity in the grand scheme of things. As stated before, she doesn't do much beyond supporting her brother from the spirit realm, and even that doesn't feel entirely necessary. Like, her ultimate purpose is to just be a living weapons dispenser. I honestly feel like you could write her out entirely, give Aphelios the ability to just summon the special moon weapons himself, and not much would ultimately change. Speaking of the weapons, there's not really a whole lot of info on them, nor the temple in which they're stored. The Lunari just made a whole sanctum in the spirit realm somehow and stashed what are basically several different guns inside. Legends of Runeterra does expand on this slightly by implying the weapons were made by or embody other celestial spirits, but even that doesn't really elaborate on much. Like, are these specifically moon spirits or what? How does that work? Look, I'm not saying you have to explain every little facet of the lore, but this does raise several questions. How and when was this temple created? Was it before or after the Solari persecution of the Lunari? How often does it manifest? Are these weapon spirits also aspects/constellations? Why do they seem to side with the moon cult specifically? There's a lot of interesting world building that just seems brushed aside for the sake of giving Aphelios an arsenal of cool toys to play with, which seems like a bit of a waste. As stated before, Aphelios seems to be wanting to try and tackle 3 different concepts all at once, but sadly doesn't seem to explore any of them nearly as in depth as he could. The Weapon Master angle is neat, but feels like it could be better explored on a different champion for whom the mastery of several different weapons is actually an important factor to their story. The sibling bond angle feels kind of irrelevant when Elune herself is barely present in the actual character, and could be written out without much consequence given that she is, again, effectively just a living weapons dispenser. The thing Aphelios does best, I think, is the zealous assassin angle. But even that feels unnecessary when, again, Diana kind of already does that for the Lunari, or at least fills a similar enough role. So how could we have gone about things differently? Well, there are several directions that I feel would make Aphelios' character more interesting, and I've pondered quite a few of them. You could have Aphelios be a disgruntled Lunari zealot who feels like Diana isn't doing enough for her people, so he decides to take matters into his own hands and creates a sub-faction within the Moon Cult. You could perhaps have him be a member of a different cult, like Justice's followers, for example, zealously punishing other Targonians who are deemed wicked or impure according to Mahira's doctrine. Personally, though, my favorite direction would be making Aphelios and Elune foils to Diana and Leona. In the Call of the Mountain cinematic for LOR, we're introduced to these 2 random lovers who come from opposing sides. They're never really given names, but the entire point of these 2 is basically to be star-crossed lovers that literally become stars at the end. A constellation showing that the Solari and Lunari can coexist despite their differences. Crazy thought, though. What if we had Aphelios and Elune do that, but better? Imagine, if you will, 2 siblings separated at birth, or at least from an early age. Aphelios is taken in and adopted by the Solari and Elune by the Lunari. They grow up leading totally different lives and believe in radically different religions, which should make them drastically opposed to each other. However, the two siblings eventually reunite and choose their bond of blood over the shackles of their respective faiths. While still devout, Aphelios and Elune begin working together to try and bring harmony to the Sun and Moon cults. Now, there's a lot of different ways that you could take this, but it would probably mean splitting Elune off into becoming her own champion, or at least having her do more than what she currently does in game. Regardless, I think this would work much better as a foil to Diana and Leona, who were driven apart by their devotion to their respective cults. It would certainly be more engaging than two random schmucks we don't even know the names of that get to become a constellation for no other reason than to be yet more ship bait. As I said, though, there are a lot of different directions you could take Aphelios as a character. The point is that I just don't think he works exceptionally well as is, because he's trying to do so many different things at once and just doesn't excel at any of them. There's nothing inherently wrong with trying to blend different ideas together for a champion, and it has worked out in the past. But you need to make sure these ideas actually gel with one another and figure out which aspects of the character you really want to highlight. Otherwise, the result is a character who just feels more confused than anything, which is just such a waste of potential. But what do you all think? What direction would you take Aphelios, given the chance? Leave your thoughts and comments down below, and until next time, stay bright.